I woke up to the sound of a key card sliding into my door lock. The handle pressed down slowly, like someone already had permission to come in. It happened during a work trip in the middle of winter. I was staying at a mid-range hotel just outside a small city. Nothing fancy, clean sheets, free breakfast, a place to sleep. I checked in late after a long drive and went straight to my room on the 4th floor. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels too heavy, like it's hiding something. The room was ordinary 2 beds, a small desk, and a TV bolted to the wall. I dropped my bag, set my wallet and the key card on the nightstand, and went downstairs to grab a vending machine snack. I was gone maybe 5 minutes. When I came back, something caught my eye immediately. On the nightstand, next to my wallet, was another key card. I froze in the doorway. I only had one. I hadn't asked for a spare. The front desk hadn't given me 2. I checked my pockets, checked my bag. Just one card. The other one was identical. Same hotel logo, same magnetic stripe, lying neatly where I'd put my things. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe housekeeping had left it by mistake, though I knew that didn't make sense. My room had already been made up when I arrived, but I was tired, so I convinced myself not to overthink it. I slipped both cards into the slot on the nightstand and went about my night. Around 1 a.m, I was half asleep when the sound jolted me awake, the faint beep of a key card at my door. My heart jumped into my throat. I stared at the dark outline of the door, waiting. Then came the soft click of the handle pressing down. The security latch I'd thrown across the door rattled but held. Whoever it was didn't push. They just... A silence hung there, heavy and unnatural. Then, nothing. No retreating footsteps, no voices, just silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I went down to the front desk, trying to sound casual. I asked if they had given someone else access to my room, maybe by mistake. The woman at the counter looked confused, checked her computer, and shook her head. Only one key was issued at check-in, she said. I slid the second card across the counter. Then explain this. She picked it up, frowned, and scanned it with her machine. After a pause, her face drained of color. This card was never activated, she whispered. It's blank. It wouldn't open any door. I didn't know what to say. She offered to move me to another room, but I had meetings all day and didn't want to pack everything up. Against my better judgment, I stayed put. That night, I triple-checked the lock and latch. I even pushed a chair under the handle. I told myself nothing would happen, that it had just been a mistake, some weird fluke. But around 3 a.m, I woke again, this time to a faint scraping sound. It was coming from inside the room. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, ears straining. The sound was low, steady like a card sliding against wood. My eyes adjusted to the dark, sweeping across the room. That's when I saw it. The key card, the second one, the blank one. It was no longer on the nightstand. It was sticking halfway out of the slot on the inside of my door, like someone had pushed it through from the hallway. I couldn't move. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me not to get up. I stared at that card for what felt like hours, waiting for the handle to turn, for the latch to rattle again. But nothing else happened. Eventually, I must have dozed off in exhaustion, still sitting upright, staring at the door. When daylight came, the card was gone. I checked the hallway, asked the desk again, even looked through my belongings. There was no trace of it anywhere. The staff swore no one had touched my room. No cameras in the hallways. No explanation. I checked out that morning, even though I had another night booked. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stayed one more night, I wouldn't be waking up to just sounds and misplaced key cards. To this day, I don't know who tried to get into my room. I don't know how that second card appeared or where it went. But sometimes, when I stay in hotels now, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I've heard that faint beep at the door again, like whoever had that card is still looking for me. Her reflection blinked after she did, not at the same time half a second too late, like the glass was deciding for itself what should happen next. It was supposed to be just another business trip. I checked into a hotel off the interstate after a long day of driving. Nothing special, just a stopover before continuing on the next morning. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. The halls smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed with that soft, unnatural hum that gets under your skin. My room was standard, a queen bed, cheap desk, TV mounted to the wall. The bathroom was small, but it had a wide mirror over the sink. I set my bag down, washed my face, and brushed my teeth, trying to shake off the road weariness. That's when I noticed it. At first, it was subtle. My reflection seemed sluggish. I'd raised the toothbrush, and in the mirror, the motion looked a fraction behind. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, leaned closer. When I tapped the sink with the toothbrush handle, I swear the sound echoed before the reflection caught up. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself I was just overtired. Maybe the harsh bathroom light was playing tricks on me. I tested it again, waving my hand quickly in front of my face. In the mirror, my hand lagged like a glitch in a video call. That was when unease began to crawl under my skin. Mirrors don't lag. They just don't. I backed out of the bathroom, heart thudding, and sat on the bed. I stared at the bathroom door, debating if I should just ignore it, chalk it up to exhaustion. After a few minutes, I forced myself back in. The mirror looked perfectly normal. I moved my arm this time. It moved with me. I breathed out, feeling stupid for overreacting. But that night, something woke me up. A soft, metallic clink, like a faucet turning. The bathroom door was cracked open, and the light was on. I know I turned it off. Slowly, I slid out of bed and crept to the door. I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. The mirror was dimly lit, reflecting the bathroom perfectly. But something was wrong. I wasn't standing in the reflection. The bathroom looked empty in the glass, even though I was very much standing there, holding the doorframe. Then, like it had been waiting for me to notice, my reflection stepped into view walking into the frame from the side, a half-second too late. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. My pulse was racing so hard, I thought I might pass out. I grabbed my bag, ready to leave right then and there, but when I reached for my phone and car keys, they were gone. I swore I left them on the nightstand, but the surface was bare. Panic set in. I tore through the room, checking under the bed, the desk, even the drawers. Nothing. Finally, against every instinct, I opened the bathroom door again. There, neatly placed on the sink counter, were my keys and my phone. And in the mirror, my reflection was already holding them. I froze. My reflection stared back at me, gripping my things, but my own hands were empty. Then, slowly, it began to smile. A smile I wasn't making. I backed out of the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and shoved a chair against it, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. I spent the rest of the night sitting awake in the farthest corner of the room, staring at that closed door, listening. At some point near dawn, I must have dozed off, because I woke to silence and daylight streaming through the curtains. The bathroom door was still closed, the chair still wedged against it. Gathering my courage, I opened the door. The bathroom looked normal again. My reflection moved in sync. My keys and phone were back in my hand. For a moment, I almost believed I dreamt it all. But just before I checked out, I turned to glance at the mirror one last time. And in that instant, I swear my reflection didn't move at all. It just stared at me, like it was waiting for me to come back. She thanked me when I tipped her, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Later, the front desk swore no one had been assigned to that floor in weeks. I was staying at a highway hotel for a work trip, one of those budget places with fluorescent hallways and a faint smell of cigarette smoke baked into the carpet. It wasn't glamorous, but I'd stayed there before and knew what to expect. Clean sheets, a working shower, and some quiet to catch up on emails. The first night was uneventful. I slept fine. The next evening, though, when I returned from work, I realized I'd forgotten to ask for extra towels. No big deal. I called the front desk, and they said someone would bring them up shortly. About 15 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a housekeeper standing there. She was older, maybe mid-50s, with tired eyes and a neatly pressed uniform. She held a stack of folded white towels in her arms. I remember being surprised, because she hadn't come from the elevator or stairwell. I hadn't heard either open. It was like she just appeared outside my door. Still, I smiled, took the towels, and thanked her. She didn't say much, just gave me this stiff little nod. Something about her expression stuck with me, though it wasn't unfriendly, exactly, but it felt hollow, like she was smiling because she was supposed to, not because she wanted to. I slipped a couple of dollars into her hand out of habit. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing mine for just a second too long. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was almost hoarse, like she hadn't spoken in a long time. Then she turned and walked down the hallway. I shut the door and went back to my laptop, thinking nothing of it. The next morning, on my way out, I passed the front desk and casually mentioned that I wanted to thank the housekeeper again for bringing the towels up the night before. The woman at the desk looked confused. "What room are you in?" she asked. 412, I told her. She frowned, tapping at her computer. "That's strange. We don't have anyone working the 4th floor right now. Short-staffed. We haven't scheduled housekeeping up there for at least 3 weeks." I laughed nervously, assuming she'd made a mistake. "Well, somebody brought me towels." She shook her head slowly. "Not from here, they didn't." The unease hit me like a wave. I left the lobby with my stomach in knots. That night, I tried to shake it off. I told myself maybe it was just a new hire or a miscommunication. But as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something. The towels she'd brought me, they weren't the same brand as the ones in the bathroom. Slightly rougher, almost yellowed, like they'd been sitting in storage a long time. I told myself I was imagining it, that they'd just been washed differently. But the thought gnawed at me. I tried to sleep, but sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of a cart rolling softly down the hallway. The squeak of wheels, the faint jingle of cleaning supplies. I froze in bed, listening. The sound stopped right outside my door. Then came a knock, 3 soft taps. I didn't move. Another knock, louder this time. My phone sat on the nightstand, and I reached for it with shaking hands, ready to call the desk. But when I glanced toward the door, I saw it something lying on the carpet in the thin slice of light beneath the frame. A folded towel. I stayed completely still until dawn. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty. The towel was gone. I checked out that morning without even showering. As I handed over my key card, I told the front desk clerk I was leaving early. She looked up at me with the same confused expression as the day before. "I'm sorry you're cutting your stay short," she said. "But just out of curiosity, was it the noise? Some guests on the 4th floor complain about strange noises." I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't want to know. I haven't gone back to that hotel since. But every now and then, when I stay somewhere new, I catch myself glancing at the towels, running my fingers over the fabric, checking their color, making sure they look fresh, and not like they've been waiting for me all along. I woke up to my name being whispered in the dark. It was coming from the air vent above the bed, It happened last year when I stayed overnight at a roadside hotel during a work trip. I'd been driving all day, exhausted, and just wanted somewhere cheap and quiet to sleep before finishing the last leg of the trip in the morning. The place wasn't glamorous, but it looked clean enough. The room was simple queen bed, desk, TV, and a single vent humming softly above the headboard. I remember thinking how loud it was, how it rattled a little every few minutes. But I was too tired to care. I showered, grabbed some takeout I'd picked up on the way, and settled into bed with the TV on low. At some point, I dozed off. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up. The room was dark. The TV had shut off. And at first, I thought it was just the vent that had stirred me. But then I realized the sound wasn't the steady hum of air anymore. It was voices. Low, muffled whispers, coming directly from the vent above my bed. I froze, straining to listen. At first, I thought maybe it was the TV in another room, or someone talking in the hallway. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. The voices weren't coming from outside my door. They were inside the vent, and they were talking about me. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard phrases. He's awake now, and don't let him know we see him. My stomach dropped. I sat up slowly, staring at the vent. The voices stopped, like they knew I was listening. I told myself it had to be some weird acoustics, maybe sound carrying from another room through the ducts. I tried to calm down, pulled the blanket tighter around me, and forced myself to lie back down. That's when the whisper came again, clear this time. A man's voice, hissing through the vent. Lie back down. I shot out of bed, heart racing, and turned on every light in the room. I stood there for a full minute, staring up at that vent, waiting for something else. But it was silent. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair by the desk, lights on, trying to convince myself I was overtired, that my brain was just playing tricks. The next morning, I mentioned it to the front desk when I checked out. The clerk gave me a blank look and said the ventilation system didn't connect the rooms that way. It's isolated, she said. You wouldn't hear anything from another room. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because that night, I stayed at another hotel hours away, completely different chain, and when I lay down to sleep, the first thing I noticed was the vent above the bed. And when the hum of the fan started beneath it, buried just barely in the white noise, I heard a whisper. He's here now. I turned the fan off immediately. The room went silent, and I sat there in the dark, staring up at the vent, afraid to even breathe. To this day, I don't know what I heard in that first hotel or how it followed me. But now, every time I stay anywhere with a vent above the bed, I can't help but wonder if someone or something is still whispering, just quiet enough that I haven't caught it yet. The room number on my key card read 213, but when I checked the hotel's map by the elevator, there was no room 213. I was on a long road trip, the kind where the hours blur together and you'll take any bed just to stop driving. I pulled into a modest hotel late at night, nothing fancy, just off the interstate. The lobby was empty, lit by a single buzzing fluorescent bulb. A tired-looking clerk handed me a key card, said my room was on the second floor, 213. The elevator groaned as it carried me up. When the doors opened, I noticed the floor plan posted on the wall next to it. Out of habit, I glanced at it, tracing my route. Rooms 210, 211, 212. Then it skipped straight to 214. Number 213 listed anywhere. I figured it was just an oversight, or maybe the hotel had renumbered rooms at some point. Still, I felt a twinge of unease as I walked down the hallway. Sure enough, halfway down on the right, there it was, 213. The numbers looked slightly off compared to the others' duller, like they hadn't been polished in years. I swiped my key card. The light turned green. The door opened without resistance. The room inside looked normal enough at first glance. 2 double beds, a dresser, a TV bolted to the wall. But the air felt heavy, stale, like no one had been inside for a long time. There was a faint, metallic smell, almost like rust. I closed the door, tossed my bag on the chair, and pulled out my phone. No signal. I tried the hotel's Wi-Fi, but the network didn't show up. Annoyed, I figured I'd just deal with it in the morning. The first real sign that something was wrong came when I turned on the TV. It flickered to life, but there were no channels. Just static, hissing loudly in the otherwise silent room. I turned it off, but for a moment after, I could still hear faint whispers beneath the static, echoing in my head. I told myself I was just exhausted. I shut off the lights and got into bed. But I couldn't sleep. The room was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. And then I heard it, a soft knock. Not at the door, but from the inside of the closet. I froze, my whole body tense. Another knock, slightly louder, as if someone or something wanted out. Heart racing, I forced myself up and crept toward the closet. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I yanked the door open. Empty. Just a dark space with a single metal bar and a couple of wire hangers swaying slightly, though I hadn't touched them. I shut the closet quickly and backed away. I ended up dozing off, sitting upright in the desk chair, the lamp still on, my eyes fixed on that door. When sunlight finally broke through the thin curtains, I felt a wave of relief. I grabbed my bag and left the room without even showering. At the front desk, I slid my key card across the counter and tried to sound casual. By the way, is there something up with room 213? The floor map doesn't even list it. The clerk blinked at me. We don't have a room 213. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. No, really. That's the room you gave me last night. He pulled up the system on his computer and turned the monitor toward me. My reservation was there, but the room listed was 214. I don't know how you ended up somewhere else, he said slowly, but 213 doesn't exist. That number's been retired for years. I left before he could say anything else. To this day, I still don't know what room I slept in that night. But I keep the key card tucked in the back of my wallet, the plastic faded, the number barely legible. Every so often, when I take it out, I swear the numbers look darker, like they've been freshly carved, waiting for me to come back. The first time I picked up the hotel phone, it dialed by itself. A voice on the other end whispered my full name. I was staying at a mid-range hotel off the interstate, the kind of place I usually avoid, but had no choice. Every other stop along the highway was fully booked. It was late, I was tired, and all I cared about was a bed. The room looked ordinary enough. Beige walls, stiff sheets, and a bulky old landline phone on the knitstand beside the bed. The kind with those yellowed plastic buttons, and a laminated card listing extensions for the front desk, room service emergencies. I unpacked a few things, tried the TV, then decided to call down to the desk to ask about breakfast hours. I lifted the receiver, but before I could press anything, the phone beeped and began dialing on its own. The buttons clicked rapidly in a sequence, and then there was silence. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, confused, but then a voice came through. It was low, raspy, almost like a whisper right against my ear. First name, last name, my full name, perfectly pronounced. I froze. I hadn't told anyone my name since checking in. Hello? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The line hissed with faint static, and then the whisper came again. First name, last name. My stomach turned. I hung up immediately. I told myself it had to be some kind of glitch. Maybe the phone line crossed. Maybe I'd misheard. I forced myself to laugh about it. though I couldn't explain how they knew my name. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, the phone rang. The sound made me jump. It was loud in the silence of the room, the shrill ringing echoing off the walls. I let it ring twice, 3 times. Against my better judgment, I answered. This time, I didn't even have to speak. The voice came immediately, the same whisper. First name, last name, we see you. I slammed the phone down so hard, it nearly toppled off the knitstand. For the rest of the night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every gust of the air conditioner set me on edge. I left the TV on low for background noise, but I kept glancing at the phone, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't, not until 3 a.m. The ring jolted me awake. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't answer it this time. I sat in the dark, staring at the phone as it rang and rang, shrill and endless, until finally it stopped. The silence after was somehow worse. When morning came, I took the phone straight to the front desk, setting it down in front of the clerk. This thing is messed up, I told him, trying not to sound as shaken as I was. It keeps calling someone, some creep who knows my name. The clerk frowned and looked down at the phone. Sir, we don't use those phones anymore. I blinked. What are you talking about? It was in my room. He shook his head. All the rooms have new cordless models now. We replaced those old landlines years ago. I stared at him, waiting for him to admit it was some kind of mistake. But he didn't. He just looked at me, confused. I went back upstairs to grab my things. When I opened the door to my room, the knitstand was empty. No phone. Not even a mark where one had been. I checked out within minutes. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. A week later, I was home, unpacking the last of my bags. At the bottom of my suitcase, buried under my clothes, was the phone receiver. Just the receiver coiled cord cut clean, plastic yellowed. And when I held it to my ear, just for a second, through the static, I heard it again. The first time I noticed it, I thought housekeeping had just made a mistake. But the third time, when I knew I'd locked the door from the inside, the Do Not Disturb sign was facing the hallway again. I was traveling for work, staying 3 nights in a mid-range hotel near the airport. Nothing fancy, just convenient. The room was typical 2 beds, a desk, heavy blackout curtains, and one of those flimsy plastic Do Not Disturb signs, with red on one side and green on the other. When I first got there, I slipped the red Do Not Disturb side onto the handle. I wanted privacy, and I planned to do some laptop work in between meetings. That evening, after grabbing dinner, I came back up to my floor. The hallway was quiet, carpet muffling my footsteps, with only the faint hum of the ice machine down the hall. When I reached my door, I froze. The sign was flipped, green side out. Please, service room. I frowned. I was sure I'd left it on Do Not Disturb. Maybe I'd been in a rush. Maybe housekeeping had changed it when I checked in. I brushed it off and went inside. But later that night, as I got ready for bed, I distinctly remembered flipping it back to red before locking the door. I even checked it twice red side out, bolt across, chain secured. The next morning, I opened the door to grab the complimentary newspaper. The sign was green again. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I asked the front desk if housekeeping had been on my floor early. The clerk shook her head. Not until after 10 a.m., she said. I'd checked my door at 8. That day, I decided to test it. Before leaving for a meeting, I flipped the sign to red again, then snapped a photo with my phone just to be sure. I even gave the handle a little shake to watch the plastic swing, locking in my memory that it was correct. When I returned that evening, the sign was green. I checked the photo, red. My stomach sank. Someone had been messing with my door. I marched down to the front desk and told them. The clerk insisted no one had accessed my room. They checked the key card logs, only my card had been used. That night, I decided not to leave the room at all. I ordered food delivery and worked on my laptop. At one point, I opened the door to grab my food bag. The sign was red, exactly as I'd left it. I locked the door, ate, and tried to distract myself with TV. Around midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. On the way back to bed, something made me glance at the door. The sign was moving. I froze. From my side of the peephole, I could see the edge of the plastic swinging slightly, like someone had just touched it. I crept closer, my heart hammering, and slowly peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me. I shoved the desk chair under the handle, turned the TV volume down low, and tried to stay awake. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I must have drifted off. I woke to a faint scratching sound. My eyes darted to the door. Through the tiny crack at the bottom, I could see shadows shifting like someone crouched right outside. Then came the sound, the plastic sign being flipped, one slow scrape at a time. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Whoever it was never knocked, never tried the handle, just scraped the sign back and forth, over and over. Eventually, the noise stopped. The silence afterward was worse. I stayed awake until dawn. When the first light crept through the curtains, I cautiously opened the door. The hallway was deserted. The sign was green again. That morning, I checked out early. The clerk asked if everything was okay with my stay. I lied and said yes. But as I rolled my suitcase toward the lobby doors, I glanced back down the hallway one last time. Every door was normal, except mine. The Do Not Disturb sign was gone. And wedged into the handle, facing outward, was my business card, the one that had been in my wallet. My name staring back at me in bold print, like whoever had been there all night wanted me to know they'd been waiting for me specifically. The phone rang at exactly 3 a.m. I answered, grudgingly, expecting a wake-up call, but what came through wasn't a voice. It was a scream. I was traveling alone for work, staying in a mid-tier hotel just off the interstate. The place was quiet, nearly empty, which was a blessing after a long day of meetings. When I checked in, the clerk asked if I needed a wake-up call. I told her no. I had set an alarm on my phone for 7 a.m. That night, I fell asleep quickly, wrapped in the heavy silence of the room. The blackout curtains kept everything pitch dark, and the low hum of the air conditioning drowned out even the occasional car that passed outside. At some point, I woke up to the shrill ringing of the room, phone on the nightstand beside me. The red light blinked in the dark. I squinted at the clock. Exactly 3 a.m. Half asleep, I fumbled for the receiver and pressed it to my ear. I expected a voice, maybe the front desk calling by mistake. What I got instead was a piercing, blood-curdling scream. It wasn't just loud. It was raw, agonized, the kind of sound that makes every muscle in your body lock up. It blasted into my ear until I dropped the phone onto the bed, heart hammering in my chest. For a few seconds, the scream continued even as the receiver lay beside me. Then, abruptly, silence. I sat there frozen, staring at the phone. My room felt colder somehow, the air thick and heavy. After a long pause, I forced myself to pick the receiver back up. Nothing, just dead air. I slammed it down, breathing hard. After a few minutes of pacing the room and convincing myself it had to be some sick prank, I decided to call the front desk to complain. But when I picked up the receiver again, there was no dial tone. Just static, faint but constant, like an untuned radio. I set it back down and grabbed my cell phone instead. I called the front desk, and when the clerk answered, I asked, trying to sound calm, if they tried to call me at 3 a.m. "No, ma'am," she said. "No calls were placed to your room." Are you sure you weren't dreaming? I wanted to argue, but the uncertainty in her voice made me stop. I muttered that it was fine, hung up, and crawled back into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Around 3:40, just as I was drifting off again, the phone rang a second time. My stomach dropped. I stared at it, the red light blinking in the dark. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I told myself not to answer, that it couldn't be real. But by the 4th ring, my shaking hand picked it up anyway. At first, only silence. Then, faint breathing, slow, deliberate. I whispered, "Who is this?" The line crackled, and a voice spoke. Low, male, almost a whisper. "You heard her too, didn't you?" I dropped the phone like it had burned me. My chest tightened, every nerve in my body screaming to leave. I didn't pick up again, not even when it rang twice more before morning. When daylight finally came, I packed my things in a rush and carried them down to the lobby. I told the front desk what had happened, though I left out the part about the man's voice. The clerk frowned and shook her head. There must be some mix-up. That line hasn't worked in years. Confused, I asked what she meant. She gestured toward her computer. All our wake-up calls are automated now. They don't come through the room phones anymore. Those phones aren't even connected to the system. I wanted to push further, to demand an explanation, but I didn't. I just turned in my key card and left. On the drive home that day, I couldn't stop replaying it all in my head. The scream, the breathing, the man's whisper. And here's the worst part. Last week, I was unpacking my suitcase when my cell phone lit up. Unknown caller. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. And through the static, faint but unmistakable, I heard the same voice from that night. "She's still screaming for you." The first time I heard the scratching, I thought it was a mouse. But then I realized it was coming from inside the locked closet. I was traveling for work when I booked a night at a historic hotel in a small town. The place looked charming on the outside, red brick, old wooden beams, the kind of building that smelled faintly of dust and polish. Inside, though, it felt different. The lobby was dim, the chandeliers low lit, and the halls echoed in a way that made every step feel like it was being followed. My room was on the 3rd floor. It was larger than I expected, with antique furniture and thick curtains that blocked out the street below. The only thing that stood out was the closet. Unlike the rest of the room, which was well kept, the closet door had a heavy padlock across the handles. The wood around it was scuffed, as if it had been forced shut more than once. I figured it was for storage, maybe housekeeping supplies, or something unsafe for guests. I didn't think much of it. That night, after a long shower, I settled into bed with the TV on low. The building creaked a little, like all old places do, and I was just about to drift off when I heard it. A faint scratch. It came again, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across wood. My eyes darted toward the closet. The scratching stopped. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, listening. For a full minute, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. I tried to convince myself it was just the pipes or something small in the walls. Then it started again. Longer this time. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I stared at the padlocked door. The sound was coming from inside. There was no mistaking it now. My throat went dry. I told myself it had to be an animal. Maybe a raccoon had gotten in through the walls. But the more I listened, the less it sounded like an animal. The scratches weren't frantic. They were deliberate, slow, measured, like something was trying to get my attention. I turned the TV volume up, desperate to drown it out. But the sound only grew louder, sharper, as though whatever was inside knew I was ignoring it. Finally, it stopped. I sat there in the glow of the TV, staring at that locked closet until my eyes burned. Sometime after 2 a.m., Exhaustion pulled me under. I woke to silence, and then a soft knock. From inside the closet. My body locked up. The knock came again, louder, and then a voice. Faint, muffled, but clear enough to freeze my blood. Let me out. I scrambled out of bed, snatched my bag, and bolted for the door. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was in the lobby, where the night clerk looked up from his desk in surprise. I stammered something about the room, about the closet, about the voice. His expression went pale. He didn't ask for details, didn't act surprised. He just said quietly, "We don't usually book that room. I'll move you." I pressed him, asking what was in the closet. He shook his head. That's not for me to say. He handed me a new key card, and I spent the rest of the night in a different room, lying awake, listening for any sound at all. The next morning, when I checked out, curiosity got the better of me. I asked the day clerk about the third-floor room with the locked closet. She gave me a confused look. "We don't use padlocks in guest rooms. Are you sure you stayed on the third floor?" I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded and walked out. I haven't been back to that town since. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when my house settles or the heater kicks on, I swear I hear it again. Fingernails dragging across wood. Slow, patient, waiting. The first night, he was just a shadow at the end of the hallway. The second night, he was closer. By the third, I could see his face. I was in a mid-tier hotel for a 3-night stay during a work trip. The place wasn't terrible, but it had that strange stillness some hotels do, like it was too empty, even though I knew other guests were around. My room was at the far end of the hall, on the 6th floor, right by the stairwell exit. The first night, after dinner, I came back up to my room around 10. The hallway was quiet, the hum of the vending machine, faint in the distance. As I walked down the corridor, I noticed something odd. At the very end, near the opposite stairwell, a man was standing perfectly still. He wasn't moving, wasn't walking toward the elevator, just standing. His head was tilted slightly down, his hands by his sides. He wasn't dressed like staff, just an ordinary-looking man, though I couldn't make out much detail in the dim lighting. I didn't want to stare. I hurried into my room, locked the door, and tried to forget about it. People do weird things, I told myself. Maybe he was waiting for someone. The second night, it happened again. I was returning from a late meeting, around midnight. As I stepped off the elevator, the hallway stretched out long and empty, except for him. The same man, same stance. But this time, he was closer. Instead of standing by the far stairwell, he was maybe 3 doors down from mine. My pulse quickened. I forced myself to walk steadily past him, but the whole time, I felt his head shift ever so slightly to follow me. I didn't look directly. I didn't want to. Once inside my room, I shoved the chair under the door handle and left the TV on all night. By the third night, I was already on edge. Every sound in the room had me jumping. I considered asking to switch floors, but it was my last night, and I figured I'd just get through it. That evening, I ordered takeout. When I stepped into the hallway to grab the bag from the delivery guy, I froze. The man was standing directly across from my door. No more distance, no more ambiguity. He was right there. His face was pale, almost gray in the hallway light. His eyes were wide open, but unfocused, staring through me rather than at me. His lips moved slightly, like he was whispering to himself, though no sound came out. I slammed the door shut so fast the takeout bag nearly slipped from my hands. My heart thundered in my chest. I stood there for minutes, listening, waiting for footsteps, a knock, anything. But there was only silence. Finally, I forced myself to look through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the chair by the door, suitcase already packed, waiting for morning. When dawn came, I opened the door cautiously. Nothing. The hallway looked ordinary, like nothing had happened at all. At checkout, I mentioned it to the front desk clerk, trying to sound casual. Hey, has anyone reported a guy just standing around on the 6th floor? Tall, pale, dark hair? Her expression didn't change at first, but her eyes flicked briefly toward her coworker. Then she forced a polite smile. No, sir. Haven't heard anything like that. I didn't press. I just wanted to leave. But as I wheeled my bag toward the exit, I passed a framed photo display near the lobby, black and white pictures of the hotel from decades ago. One of the old staff portraits caught my eye. A man in a bellhop uniform, standing stiffly at the edge of the group. Pale face, dark hair, wide, unfocused eyes. The same man from the hallway. I left without another word, but I can't shake the feeling that if I ever stayed there again, he wouldn't wait 3 nights. He'd already be waiting at my door. The first night, it was faint, just a soft, tuneless humming through the wall. By the second night, we could hear words. Someone singing a lullaby to a child who wasn't there. My wife and I had taken a short weekend trip to a small mountain town. It wasn't far from home, just a quick getaway, and we'd booked a room in a modest hotel near the town square. The building was old, with narrow hallways and floral-patterned carpets, but it was clean and quiet. Or at least, we thought it was. That first night, we returned from dinner and settled into bed around 11. The walls were a bit thin. We could hear the occasional door closing down the hall, but nothing out of the ordinary. Until, just as we were drifting off, a faint humming started from the room next to ours. At first, we thought nothing of it. It was late, and maybe a guest was humming to their child to help them sleep. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost soothing. But the longer it went on, the stranger it seemed. The melody didn't stop. It wasn't a brief song or two. It went on, cycling through the same few notes, like a lullaby that never ended. I remember whispering to my wife, "It's midnight. Who sings their kid to sleep for an hour straight?" She just shrugged, but I could tell she was uneasy too. Eventually, the sound faded, and we fell asleep. The second night, it started again, this time earlier, around 10. At first, just humming, then words. A woman's voice, soft and deliberate, singing old lullabies we vaguely recognized. But the way she sang them, it was wrong. The words stretched too long, the notes drawn out until they almost cracked, as though the singer was forcing herself to stay calm. We pressed our ears to the wall. There were no other sounds. No footsteps, no child stirring, no television. Just her voice and the occasional creak of the bed frame shifting. I decided to mention it to the front desk the next morning, casually asking if the family next door might keep it down at night. The clerk looked at me strangely. "Which room are you in?" 214, I told her. She shook her head. "That side of the floor is empty. We don't book the connecting room. Too close to the maintenance closet." I laughed awkwardly, thinking she must be mistaken. But my wife and I exchanged a glance that said we were both thinking the same thing. We'd heard it. Both of us. That night, we kept the lights on, telling ourselves we were being ridiculous. Still, when the humming started again, softer this time, almost like it was directly against the wall, we sat up instantly. The lullaby was clearer now. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." The voice was low, raspy, almost a whisper. And then, as the verse ended, a second sound joined in. A faint, wet cough. A child's cough. My wife grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, the woman's voice came again, sharper now. "Go back to sleep." The room went dead silent. We didn't sleep much after that. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the old building had us on edge. At some point near dawn, exhaustion pulled us under. When we woke, we both agreed we couldn't stay another night. As we packed, I realized something that made my skin crawl. The wall we'd been hearing the voice through wasn't the wall to another guest room. It was the wall to the old, padlocked maintenance room the clerk had mentioned, the one no one was supposed to use. We checked out without explaining why. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I swear I can still hear it faintly in my head. That same lullaby, sung too slowly, too sweetly, followed by a child's cough. Like she's still trying to soothe someone to sleep, or waiting for someone new to listen. The elevator dinged, but when the doors slid open, it wasn't the fourth floor. It wasn't any floor I should have been on at all. I was in town for a short business trip, staying at a mid-range hotel downtown. Nothing special, but nicer than the roadside motels I usually found myself in. My room was on the fourth floor, and after dinner, I got into the elevator with a takeout bag in hand, ready to wind down for the night. There was only one other person inside, a man in a suit, staring at the corner. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me, just stood there like he'd been waiting too long. I pressed the button for 4. The elevator doors closed, the car rumbled upward, and the little light above the panel blinked as it passed floors 2, then 3. But when it should have dinged for 4, it didn't stop. The light skipped straight to 5. I frowned and reached to press the button again. That's when the man in the corner finally spoke, his voice flat and quiet. "Don't." I froze. Before I could ask what he meant, the elevator jolted, hard enough to rattle the walls. The overhead lights flickered. Then, with a soft chime, the doors slid open. It wasn't the 4th or 5th floor. The hallway outside was dimly lit by buzzing fluorescent bulbs. Half of them burned out. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpet torn. No signs, no numbers on the doors, just a long corridor stretching in both directions. The man stepped out without hesitation. He didn't look at me, didn't say anything else. Just walked down the hallway until the shadows swallowed him. I called after him, but he didn't respond. I should have stayed inside, should have pressed the lobby button, gone back down, told someone. But curiosity, or maybe something else, made me step out too. The air was stale, heavy, and cold. My footsteps barely made a sound on the threadbare carpet. Every door I passed was locked, no room numbers, just blank plaques where the numbers should have been. About halfway down the hall, I realized something that made my stomach twist. There were no exits, no stairwells, no exit signs glowing above the doors. Just hallway, stretching on. And behind me, the elevator doors had closed. I hurried back, heart pounding, and pressed the call button again and again. Nothing. The panel was dead. No light, no sound. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. They were coming from farther down the hall, slow and steady, each one echoing too loud for how soft the carpet was. I spun around, peering into the flickering light. At first, I thought it was the man in the suit. But no, this figure was taller. Its arms hung too low at its sides. It walked with a strange jerking gait, like it was being pushed forward rather than moving on its own. I backed toward the elevator, slamming the button again. Come on. The footsteps grew louder. Finally, with a shudder, the doors opened behind me. I stumbled inside, nearly dropping my takeout bag. I didn't look back. I just slammed the close door button over and over until the doors finally shut. The elevator lurched, the panel lit back up, and the car rose. Ding, 4th floor. When the doors slid open, everything looked normal again. Bright hallway, patterned carpet, numbered doors. I rushed to my room, locked the door, and didn't come out again until morning. At checkout, I asked the desk clerk casually if the hotel had any abandoned floors, maybe ones under renovation. She gave me a puzzled look. No, sir. Just floors 1 through 8, nothing else. I didn't press. I just left. But here's the thing. A week later, When I unpacked my suitcase, I found something wedged between my clothes. A key card. It wasn't from the hotel I'd stayed at. It was blank, scratched, with no logo or label. But written on it, in smudged black marker, was a single number, 213. And I can't stop thinking about the man in the elevator, how he never came back. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the pipes groaning. But then, over the rush of the shower water, a whisper said my name. I was halfway through a week-long work trip, staying in a mid-range hotel off the highway. Nothing fancy, just a place with a decent bed and hot water. After a long day of meetings, I wanted nothing more than to wash the exhaustion off me and collapse. The bathroom was small, with cracked tiles and a wide mirror above the sink. I let the water run until steam began to fog the glass, then stepped into the shower. The spray was hot, pounding against my shoulders, and I closed my eyes, trying to relax. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint like a shift in the steam or a hiss from the pipes. But then it became clearer. A voice, low, whispering my name. I froze. My eyes flew open, water streaming down my face. I whipped the curtain aside and stared into the bathroom. Nothing but fog curling across the mirror, the faint drip of water echoing in the small room. I told myself I was tired, that it was in my head. I pulled the curtain back and continued showering, but my ears strained over the water, and then it came again, closer. Name. This time it wasn't muffled. It was right there, inside the stall with me. I spun around, heart pounding, staring at the empty corners of the shower. The steam clung to the walls like a veil. My breath came shallow, the hot water suddenly unbearable. I shut it off and stepped out, wrapping myself in a towel with shaking hands. The mirror was completely fogged, but as I wiped a streak with my palm, I froze. There was a handprint, not mine, larger, pressed from the inside of the mirror as though someone was on the other side of the glass, pushing to get out. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet tile. My chest tightened, panic clawing up my throat. I grabbed my clothes and bolted from the bathroom, refusing to look back. For the rest of the night, I left the bathroom door shut, the TV blaring to drown out the silence. Every time the air conditioner kicked on, I jumped. The next morning, curiosity or maybe stupidity made me check. The mirror was spotless. No handprint. I told myself I'd imagined it, a mix of fatigue and paranoia. But that night, when I went to brush my teeth, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Words, faint, scrawled across the bottom of the mirror in the condensation. I found you. I left the bathroom light on and didn't shower again. By the time my trip ended, I was running on fumes, jittery from lack of sleep. At checkout, I almost didn't say anything. But as the clerk printed my receipt, I asked if anyone else had ever complained about strange things in the bathrooms. She gave me a long look, then leaned in slightly. Was it the voice? My stomach dropped. She didn't elaborate, didn't explain, just handed me my receipt and wished me a safe trip. I didn't answer her. I just left. But now, even at home, every time I shower, I can't relax. I keep my ears open, waiting. And sometimes, when the water is rushing loud enough, I swear I hear it again. My name, whispered in the steam, closer each time. When I checked in, the clerk mentioned the windows were sealed shut for safety. But the next morning, mine was wide open, the curtains billowing into the room. I was in the city for a conference, staying on the 20th floor of a high-rise hotel. The place was sleek, modern, and had all the amenities you'd expect: gym, bar, rooftop lounge. My room had a great view of the skyline, framed by tall floor-to-ceiling windows that, according to the clerk, couldn't be opened. They're sealed, she'd explained, to prevent accidents. That first night, I stayed up late going over my presentation, then collapsed into bed. I remember double-checking the deadbolt before lying down. The city lights leaked faintly through the edges of the blackout curtains, but otherwise, the room was silent. When I woke, something was wrong immediately. The air was freezing, much colder than it should have been with the thermostat set to 70. I sat up shivering, and that's when I saw it. The curtains were blowing inward. Slow, steady gusts of cold morning air flowed into the room. My stomach dropped. The window 20th floor, sealed shut, was wide open. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the icy carpet, and rushed to the glass. Sure enough, one of the massive panes had been slid several inches ajar. The gap was wide enough for a person to step through. The wind howled faintly, carrying the sound of the city below. My heart hammered in my chest. I slammed the window shut and yanked the curtains together, trying to process what I was seeing. How had it opened? It wasn't supposed to open. I thought maybe I'd imagined the sealed part, so I checked the frame. There was no latch, no handle. The edges looked fused, like they were never meant to move. And yet, it had. I went downstairs for breakfast, trying to shake it off. At the desk, I casually asked the clerk if some of the windows actually opened. She frowned. No, sir, none of them do. Not on any floor. The unease in my chest spread. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I just nodded and went back upstairs. All day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The cold air, the gap in the glass, the way it had looked like someone had been in the room. That night, I set every lock, pulled the curtains tight, and left the light on. I told myself it wouldn't happen again, but sometime after 3 a.m., I woke up shivering. The air was freezing again. Dread filled me before I even moved. Slowly, I sat up, and my stomach flipped. The curtains were blowing outward, this time out toward the open night sky. The window was open again. I stayed frozen in bed, staring at the gap. And then, faintly, I heard it. The sound of breathing. Not mine. Not from the hallway. From outside the window. I forced myself to move, to inch closer. The night wind gusted harder, rattling the glass. My reflection wavered faintly in the pane. But behind it, just for a second, I thought I saw another face. Pale. Watching. I stumbled back, heart racing, and slammed the curtains shut. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, the window was closed, like nothing had ever happened. I checked out early without explanation. But here's what haunts me most. When I got home and unpacked my suitcase, one of my dress shirts was missing. I thought I'd left it in the hotel closet until I noticed the faint smell of city air on the sleeve of the jacket I'd worn that night. And on the fabric, barely visible, was a gray smudge, like a handprint, on the outside of the sleeve, as if someone had gripped me while I slept and then slipped back out into the 20-story drop through a window that wasn't supposed to open. When I unlocked my hotel room, the lights were already on. My suitcase was open on the bed, neatly unpacked and arranged exactly the way I would have done it. I was traveling for work, a quick 2-night stay at a mid-range hotel just off the highway. I checked in late, exhausted from the drive, and was looking forward to a shower and sleep. The clerk handed me my key card with a polite smile and told me my room was ready. When I got to the door and swiped the card, I felt a flicker of relief. Finally, I could collapse. But the second the lock clicked and I stepped inside, something was off. The lamp on the nightstand was on, casting a soft yellow glow. That was strange enough. I hadn't turned it on. But then my eyes fell on the bed. There was my suitcase, unzipped. My shirts hung neatly in the closet, my socks and boxers folded in the drawer, my toiletries lined up on the bathroom counter. Exactly how I usually unpack. My heart sank. I stumbled back into the hallway, checking the number on the door. 308. I pulled out my key card. 308. I told myself the front desk must have made a mistake, maybe given me a room that was already occupied. But when I went back in, there were no other signs of a guest. No wallet, no phone, no laptop, just my stuff, unpacked, before I'd even been inside. I stood there for a long time, my pulse hammering in my ears. Finally, I convinced myself it was some bizarre prank or mix-up. Maybe housekeeping thought they were being helpful. I didn't want to argue with the desk clerk at midnight, so I decided to let it go. But I couldn't relax. I checked the drawers again. Every item was exactly how I would have placed it. Socks rolled, t-shirts stacked by color. Even the toothbrush set at an angle on the counter, the way I always do. No one else would know that. Sleep was impossible. I left the TV on for background noise and lay awake in the bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. At some point, I drifted off and woke to the sound of the closet door sliding open. I shot upright. The TV still hummed low, but the closet door was now ajar. My shirts swayed faintly on their hangers, like someone had just brushed past them. I didn't move. I just sat frozen, every hair on my body standing on end. Finally, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called the front desk. When the clerk answered, I whispered, "Did someone come into my room?" She sounded confused. "No, sir. Our system logs all key card use. No one's accessed your room but you." I hung up without another word and sat in silence, staring at the closet until dawn. The next morning, I packed everything back into my suitcase as fast as I could. But when I opened the nightstand drawer to check for anything I'd missed, I froze. Inside was a notebook. I hadn't put it there. I opened it slowly. The first page was blank. The second page, too. But on the third page, in handwriting eerily similar to mine, were the words, "Welcome back. I missed you." I left the notebook behind, zipped my suitcase, and practically ran to the front desk. I told the clerk I needed to check out early. She asked if everything was okay, and I just muttered that I'd changed my plans. But as she printed my receipt, she glanced at her screen and frowned. "That's strange," she said softly. "It looks like you've stayed in 308 before. Same name, same ID number. But the system says that was over a year ago." I told her that was impossible. I'd never been to that town, let alone that hotel. She gave me a nervous smile, slid the receipt across the counter, and didn't press. I left and never looked back. But ever since that night, when I unpack my suitcase at home, I can't shake the feeling that someone else has already touched my things. Sometimes I'll even find them arranged exactly how I like them, before I've laid a hand on them. I flicked on the hotel TV, expecting late-night news. Instead, I saw myself lying in the same bed I was sitting in, fast asleep. I was in town for a work seminar, stuck in one of those cheap hotels near the highway. It wasn't a dive, but it wasn't the kind of place you'd brag about staying either. Beige wallpaper, scratchy sheets, old tube-style TV perched on a dresser. I had trouble sleeping that night. It was close to 1 a.m. when I finally gave up on trying. The room was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hear every creak in the walls. I grabbed the remote, hoping a little background noise would help. The screen buzzed to life with a low hum of static before snapping into an image. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of security feed. The camera angle was wide, pointed at a bed in a small hotel room identical to mine. Then my chest went cold. It wasn't just a bed like mine. It was my bed, my room, and in it, someone was sleeping. Someone who looked exactly like me. I stared at the screen, breath caught in my throat. The figure shifted slightly under the covers, the way I had been tossing minutes earlier. His head tilted, his chest rose and fell. I scrambled up, heart pounding, and looked back at my own bed. Empty. I was standing in front of it. But on the screen, I was still asleep. I clicked through the channels, my hands shaking. No matter what number I pressed, the same feed played, the same angle, the same me lying in that bed. I told myself it had to be some kind of prank, a recorded loop. Maybe the hotel had old footage running. But the figure on the screen shifted again, turning in sync with how I'd moved an hour earlier. His hand rubbed at his eyes, the way I do when I'm half awake. It wasn't old footage. It was live. The air in the room felt heavy. I turned the TV off, but the screen didn't go black. The image remained. The me that wasn't me stirred and sat up slowly. In the bed, on the screen, not in real life. I stumbled back against the dresser, knocking the remote to the floor. My reflection double swung his legs over the side of the bed, feet touching the carpet. I looked down at the actual bed, still empty, the sheets undisturbed. Then the double turned his head and looked straight at the camera, straight at me. I fumbled for the remote and yanked the TV's plug from the wall. Sparks popped, the screen died, the room plunged into silence. I stood there in the glow of the bedside lamp, chest heaving, eyes darting between the unplugged TV and the empty bed. Minutes dragged. Nothing happened. Finally, I crawled into bed, too exhausted to think. I told myself it had to be exhaustion playing tricks. But just as I began to drift off, the TV clicked back on. Unplugged, the screen flickered, static hissing. Then the image returned. Only this time, the bed on the screen wasn't empty anymore. I was in it. Not the me standing in the room, trembling under the covers, but a perfect copy, tucked in exactly as I was at that moment, breathing in sync with me, eyes shut like mine. I couldn't move. My chest tightened. The version of me on the screen stirred, rolled over, and then, without opening his eyes, whispered something I couldn't hear. I grabbed my bag, bolted out the door, and didn't stop until I was in the lobby, demanding to check out. The clerk looked startled, but didn't argue. As she printed my receipt, I glanced at the wall behind her. Mounted above the desk was a small security monitor, and on one of the grainy feeds, I saw the 6th floor hallway. My hallway. The camera panned slowly, and for just a second, I caught sight of my own door. And standing outside it, head tilted toward the peephole, was me, watching, waiting. When I waved at my own reflection in the hotel window, it didn't wave back. It just stood there, smiling faintly, waiting for me to notice. I was in town for a 2-night stay, tucked into a bland business hotel with narrow hallways and stiff sheets. My room was on the 10th floor, with a wide window overlooking the parking lot and the dim glow of the freeway beyond. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the air conditioner, the muffled thumps from other rooms, the faint neon glow from a diner across the street, it all kept me restless. At one point, around midnight, I got up and went to the window to look out. That's when I noticed it. At first, it seemed like nothing. My reflection in the glass stood where I did, framed by the dim glow of the room light behind me. But when I tilted my head, the reflection didn't move. It just stared back at me. I froze, leaning closer. After a moment, it slowly mirrored my tilt, but just a beat too late, like it was choosing when to follow. I stepped back from the glass, goosebumps crawling up my arms. I told myself it was just my imagination. Bad lighting, fatigue. I went back to bed and eventually drifted off. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I chalked it up to exhaustion and got through my meetings. But that night, it happened again. I'd left the curtains cracked slightly, just enough for the glow of the city to seep in. When I glanced at the window, I felt that same jolt of unease. My reflection wasn't aligned with me. I raised my hand slowly. In the glass, my reflection's hand twitched late, almost lazily, like it couldn't be bothered to keep up. I stepped closer until my breath fogged the glass. My reflection's mouth curled into the faintest grin. I didn't smile. The room felt colder. I yanked the curtains shut and left the TV on for noise. I didn't dare look again. The third night, I thought about asking the hotel to switch my room, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. It was my last night anyway. I tried to ignore the window completely. Around 2 a.m., I woke suddenly, the room freezing. The curtains were open. I knew I'd shut them. Heart pounding, I turned my head toward the glass. My reflection was standing right against the window. I wasn't. I was still in bed, half under the covers, shaking. The figure in the glass raised its hand slowly, dragging its palm across the inside of the window with a screech I could almost hear. Its smile widened, teeth faint in the dim glow. Then its lips moved. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew. It was mouthing my name. I bolted out of bed, grabbed my bag, and didn't even bother putting on shoes. I ran down the hallway, past the elevator, down the stairwell, until I was in the lobby. The night clerk barely glanced up as I told him I needed to check out early. I left before dawn, the highway stretching out in front of me. I told myself I'd never set foot in that hotel again. But last night, back home, I caught myself staring out my own bedroom window. And just for a second, in the dark reflection of the glass, I saw it again, that faint, knowing smile, moving just a little slower than me.
The first knock came just after midnight. By the fifth, I realized it wasn't going to stop. I was staying overnight at a budget hotel off the highway, the kind of place with buzzing lights in the lobby and stale air in the hallways. I had a long drive the next morning and just needed a few hours of sleep, nothing more. The room was plain but fine. One bed, a desk, a heavy curtain blocking out the parking lot lights. I set my bag down, bolted the lock, and stretched out. Sometime around midnight, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. 3 soft knocks on the door. I sat up, heart thudding. At first, I thought maybe it was the wrong room, some drunk guest. I waited. Nothing. I got out of bed and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I stood there a long time before finally climbing back into bed. About 10 minutes later, it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I checked faster. Still nothing. The pattern repeated. Every few minutes, the knocks would return, always 3 in a row, always soft, always with no one outside. I tried to ignore it, shoving a pillow over my head, but the sound seeped through. Each time, it set my nerves on edge a little more. My chest felt tight, like the air was heavier than it should be. By 2 a.m., I was wide awake, every muscle tense. I sat in the chair by the door, staring at it, waiting for the next set of knocks. When they came, I jumped up, ripped the door open, and the hallway stretched empty in both directions. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I stepped out. The air was cold, unnaturally so, like the AC was blasting just in that corridor. I walked a few steps, glanced both ways. Silence. I shut the door quickly, locked it, and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. But this time, the knocks started almost immediately. Knock, 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 right against the wood at my back. I spun around, staring at the door. My eyes darted to the peephole again, but the hallway was still empty. Something inside me snapped. I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice cracked in the silence. No answer, just 3 more knocks. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair with every light on, my suitcase by my side, waiting for dawn. The knocking never stopped. Every few minutes, like clockwork, all the way until sunrise. When daylight finally spilled through the curtains, I worked up the courage to open the door one last time. The hallway was quiet, but on the doorframe just at eye level were faint scratches. Long, thin gouges in the wood, as if something had been dragging its nails there each time it knocked. I checked out without saying a word to the clerk. But here's what keeps me awake now, even at home. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear it again. Knock, knock, knock. And I know, one of these nights, when I finally look through the peephole, something will be waiting.